You're listening to the Nutmegged Arena by the Nutmeg Assist.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 50 of the TNA podcast, brought to you by the Nutmeg Assist. Myself, Ritik, the host of the show. Today, in this special episode, we're going to be covering a special topic, and we have a special guest as well joining us. But before we introduce him, I'd like to welcome Chris, the co-host of the show as well. Welcome, Chris, once again.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to this one. Should be good.
Yeah, same thing here. And the special guest for today's episode is Karan Tejwani. He has written the book Wings of Change. It's on the Red Bull clubs and how Red Bull went from an energy manufacturer drink to dominating the football world as well. You could perhaps say dominating, but yeah. So welcome, Karan, to the show.
Hi, thank you, Ritik. Thanks for having me on.
Great. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I take it as a joint thank you. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Karan, before we start, would you like to tell us a little bit about your book?
So the Wings of Change covers the influence of Red Bull in football. It looks at how Red Bull, despite being so controversial, are so much fun to watch. I think that many people will say that they should not exist in football, but while they say that sort of thing, they'll also admit that they are a fun team to watch, and they have a very streamlined project going on. But yeah, it covers a lot of things. It covers the main people involved in the project, people like Ralf Rangnick, people like Jesse Marsch, and then Really Nagelsmann and a few others. It also looks at the philosophies, which is, promoting youngsters, going through intensive international scouting and bringing in players from different parts of the world. And then there are a few interviews as well with people like Bradley Wright Phillips, who played for the New York Red Bulls, and Ernst Tanner, who was the academy coach at Red Bull Salzburg. So it's a mix of a lot of things, and it tells the story of Red Bull's influence in football over the last 15 years.
Great. And we'll actually start this episode with our patron questions. But yeah. I let Chris start with the patron question.
Yeah, this is a bit of a change. We changed this round this week because our Patreon questions are actually very good from what I've seen this week. So we thought we'd get the show up and running with them because... But yeah, like I said, the Patreon questions are really good. So I think it's a good way to start the show this week. So these questions are from our Patreon Paul Signer, Karen. And to get the ball rolling, basically, can you see Red Bull purchasing any other teams in the future?
It's hard to see it in Europe because there's a lot of issues with UEFA's conflict of interest rules. So it's hard because the last time Red Bull Salzburg and RB Leipzig qualified for European competition, there was an issue with UEFA, which is there's a law where two clubs who have the same owners cannot be playing in European competition. So they had to make a few switches at a boardroom level. So It's difficult to see it happening in Europe in a first team capacity. Maybe they'll have a developmental club in the second or third division of some country. Just so that they can send some players out on loan there once in a while. But in Europe, it's very unlikely. And maybe out overseas, they already have a club in North America with the New York Red Bulls. In South America, they have two clubs in Brazil. So maybe if they go back to some historical links, because Red Bull were formed in Thailand, maybe they'll start up an academy somewhere in Asia. But it's very unlikely that they start a club or invest in a club out and out.
Yeah. So, just to build on Paul's question, they've got strong ties with Africa in terms of the players, some of the players that come through, well, specifically Salzburg and Leipzig. Would Africa not be the main aim next, or is that maybe due to the countries themselves maybe playing a part in them not being able to have a club over there?
I doubt it's going to happen because they had a club in Africa for a very brief period. It was called Red Bull Ghana, and it lasted for about 6 years. And they shut down operations in 2014 because they didn't have much knowledge about the region. So, and they didn't shut down the operations there entirely. They formed links with different academies throughout the continent. Academies like Kafue Celtics in Zambia, academies like the West African Football Academy in Ghana. So they find the best talents from these respective academies and bring them over to Europe, either in Salzburg or in Leipzig. So that's the same thing I said earlier. They will form links with academies worldwide, and that's perhaps a more economically beneficial way to go about things as well. So it's very unlikely for clubs out and out, but academy level and developmental level, there's certainly a very big chance.
Yeah. And another question that Paul has asked is, how much of a benefit to the Red Bull brand is there in owning these clubs? So
yeah, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Sorry,
my mic cut off. Right. So from a brand perspective, it's incredibly massive. I don't really have the numbers for it, but there is always an insinuation that Red Bull are doing this to promote their brand. If you look at their involvement in other sports or sports like F1 or any winter sports, they're always trying to promote their brand by having their advertisement either on the products that they use, the F1 cards or in any motocross bikes or anything like that. So they're always trying to get their brand up front. And given that football is such a popular sport, and Leipzig particularly have been playing in the Champions League for 3 of the last 4 seasons, and they reached the semi-finals last year, it's a definite boost to their brand. If you go down to Brazil, you will see that last year when Red Bull Bragantino got promoted, Red Bull conducted this sort of ceremony to commemorate their promotion, and fans of the club were happy to wear Red Bull shirts. Those shirts that adorned Red Bull's logo, and they were happy to wear those shirts. And so there's definite increase in their popularity of the brand, and that is one of the aims of Red Bull's football influence, that they want to help grow the energy drink.
Yeah, and again, building on Paul's question there, would you say at the moment football is the main part of the Red Bull brand, or would you say other sports are it's still catching up to the other sports?
I still feel it's catching up to perhaps F1. The F1 team's been around for nearly 2 decades now. I think it's about 15 or 16 years. So they're definitely speeding up fast. As I said earlier, with Leipzig, obviously reaching the Champions League semi-final was a massive deal for them. So they're definitely catching up as the most popular, and they will be the most popular sport for Red Bull and the most profitable one. The founder of Red Bull, or the co-founder of Red Bull, Dietrich Mateschitz, always looks for profit in things, and if he doesn't find profit, he will drop the project. So given the football operations have been running on for so long, and he's finding considerable success in it, it's definitely worth saying that they are finding the desired results in football. Yeah,
and you've mentioned Leipzig. That brings us on to Paul's third and final question. I mean, they're widely regarded by many fans in Germany as one of the most hated clubs, probably the most hated club within the German leagues. Has that perception changed now that they're given their success last year in the Champions League, or is it starting to change in any way?
I do feel with the older fans, the more traditional fans who've been watching for over, say, 15, 20, 30 years, they definitely feel Red Bull or Leipzig are a more test tube sort of club. They're not very authentic. Have the same history as the other clubs in the Bundesliga. When you look at clubs like Kaiserslautern, who've been struggling in the lower division of the German league ladder, or even Arminia Bielefeld, who just got promoted for the first time in over a decade this season, they definitely feel that these older traditional clubs should have a chance of playing in the Bundesliga, but because they don't have the same financial backing, Leipzig and even Hoffenheim take up their place. So the older traditional fans definitely do feel that Leipzig and their model should not exist. The way they got here, they started off in the 5th division, which is, they skipped a few divisions of, ideally they were in the 12th division if they were a new club, but they started in the 5th division. So that's a bit controversial. Then they spent a lot of money, around 50 odd million euros between the 5th division and the 1st division, in order to get there. And that's the sort of money no other club in that level has. So, and obviously then the 50+1, they circumvented the 50+1 rule, and that's perhaps the biggest sin in German football for a football club. So, given those few factors and the fact that they're obviously still very controversial, the traditional fans don't feel that they should have a place in the Bundesliga. I do feel the younger ones do have more of an acceptance, that football is going this way. They're against the whole modern football sort of thing, where they do want clubs like these, but they can't do anything about it, so they just accept that it's happening. And more clubs like this will emerge in the future, maybe in Germany, maybe anywhere else. But this is the way of the game right now, where money triumphs over emotion or just plain football. So there are more accepting people than there were. There are more accepting people now than there were 5 or 6 years ago. But it's still quite a controversial topic in German football.
Yeah, and have Salzburg gone through anything? I know Salzburg were already a club and probably a lot more established in Austrian football in terms of their status before Red Bull got involved. But have they suffered any kind of similar sort of dysfunction from opposing fans since Red Bull become heavily involved in the club?
Yeah. The difference between German and Austrian football is that Austrian football isn't as fan-centric as German football is.
Yeah.
So even before Red Bull's takeover of Salzburg, Austria Salzburg, the club they took over, were known to have a sponsor in their name. They were called Casino Salzburg at one point in time, and they played the UEFA Cup final with that name.
Yeah.
So it's not uncommon to have sponsors in your club's name. Many clubs have done that before. The problem with Red Bull's takeover of Austria Salzburg was that when they took over, the club's name was changed, the club's crest was changed, their colours, their stadium name, basically their whole identity. And that's what really infuriated supporters and, made Red Bull a very despicable organisation in Austrian football. Right now, people are a little more accepting because obviously Red Bull is a Salzburg company. They have their headquarters in Salzburg. Dietrich Mateschitz, the co-founder, lives in Salzburg, and he pays his taxes in Salzburg. So they do feel it's more of a local thing. But it's very unlikely that you go to a city like Vienna and you find a Salzburg fan, a very accepting Salzburg fan, because outside of that Salzburg bubble, people are still very unwelcoming of them. And obviously, given their financial power, they've been winning the Bundesliga for, I think, the last 6 years or 7 of the last 8 years. But they won the Austrian Bundesliga several times in the last few years, and same with the OFB Cup. They have a much bigger financial supporting system than other clubs. So that's obvious reasons for hating a club. But they do face backlash, but it's significantly lesser than what Leipzig face.
Yeah. And just before we move on to our second set of Patreon questions, which Rick will ask you in a minute, you've touched on Leipzig and the amount of, certainly once upon a time, hatred that they've got from opposing fans, and you touched upon the 50+1 rule in Germany, which in some sense, I mean, from the outside looking in, the 50+1 rule seems like a great thing for football clubs, especially sort of from English fans looking from the outside. But there's a bit of a sense in Germany that maybe it's holding some clubs back, that rule, just because maybe those clubs need a bit more investment from overseas. I think in Leipzig's case, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, Karan, I've got very much the perception that, they have had the benefits and the advantages than the lower league teams, like you've mentioned, Kaiserslautern specifically, of having that funding. But if Red Bull are promoting youth and they're putting money into the club, and the club are then going out and buying younger players from, like you said, all around the world, and they're doing really everything that a football club should be. It's not like they're using the club to promote their brand and then not sort of putting any money back into the club. Then as a football fan, surely that's got to be seen as a positive thing, hasn't it?
In a way, yes. When Leipzig reached the Champions League semi-final, there was a massive debate of whether this club is acceptable. And what I felt was a majority of them felt it was fine because of the reasons you mentioned. They promote younger players, and their spending isn't as significant as a Manchester City or a PSG.
Yeah.
And you're right when you say that perhaps looking from a perspective outside of Germany, that's fine. But German football is so fan-centric, and it's not just about the 50+1 rule alone. Leipzig have made a few controversial decisions that haven't gone well, even with Leipzig fans. You may have seen plenty of times over the years where German football is incredibly political. They voice their concerns over political issues. The refugee crisis in 2015. They want equality in games, equality for women, equality for homosexuals. So that's the sort of thing RB Leipzig the club themselves have tried to squash in a way.
Yeah.
And, even financially, there was a case a couple of years ago where they financed their debt in a way that other clubs would not be able to because they don't have the money. So, they're not as extravagant with their spending as a PSG or a Man City, but in their own way, they are making decisions that aren't going down very well with German football fans. So I do understand the perspective of international fans to say that they're doing good things for football, but if you look at it from a German perspective, you understand why they are so despised. Even personally, for me, I didn't really follow German football that well until about 3 or 4 years ago. And, for me, it was, Leipzig, they're doing an okay thing. But when you understand German football culture, you will try to figure out, you'll understand why exactly Leipzig are so hated.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And we'll come back onto that subject after Rithwik has finished with our next set of Patreon questions through Dita.
Yeah. And these questions are from Data. So you actually answered Chris's questions regarding Leipzig. So this is Dita's question mainly surround the Red Bull team from the other Bundesliga in Austria, which is Red Bull Salzburg. So Salzburg actually is a team known for producing a lot of wonderful young players. We've seen in the last few years, Sadio Mane was part, Naby Keita again, because those two are Liverpool players, obviously, so I just recall both of them. There have been a lot of other players as well. Haaland now.
Minamino as well.
Minamino, absolutely. So they're kind of like a factory who produce wonderful young players, and mostly you see the young players from Salzburg move to Germany, or maybe a kind of a temporary location first. Like they kind of try to build their career in Germany first, and then they seek for that big move. But Dieter's first question is about one such youngster, Patson Daka, who's currently at Salzburg. So he's actually shown a lot of promise. He's a player who is definitely one to look out for this season and also in the upcoming years. So his question is regarding the number of goals that you expect Daka to score this season. But do you think Daka will be a huge success as well, Karan?
Yeah, definitely. He's definitely going to be a big player in the future. He's definitely the sort of player who's going to move from Salzburg for maybe 30, 35, maybe 40 million euros. He has the quality, he has all the necessary attributes you need from a top forward. And, he's still quite young. And this is his first season where he's been given the role of being the first choice number 9. Last season it started with Erling Haaland, and he did very well for himself and got a move to Dortmund. And midway through the campaign, Patson Daka was, sort of thrust into the spotlight, and he did very well for himself. He scored, 24 goals all season. So I expect him to score more than that this season. He'll definitely break the 30 barrier. He's already got 6 in 3 games this season, so he's going for a big number for sure. If he gets 40, it's a very big deal. But a lot of it depends on the Champions League as well. Maybe by the time this podcast is out, Salzburg will have qualified for the playoff round. But I do feel that Salzburg will reach the group stage of the Champions League once again this season. And if he does a good job like Haaland did last season, where Haaland scored, I think, 6 goals in the group stages, if Daka scores maybe 4 or 5, there could be a move for him as early as the winter transfer window. So back to your question, I do feel that he will score at least 30 goals this season if he plays the entire season at Salzburg. And a good target for him would be to score 4 or 5 in the Champions League.
And building on the question again, Karan, which club probably do you expect, or which league do you expect Daka to move? Because there's been a lot of interest from England, France, and also Germany. So where do you actually expect him to move, or where do you think will he actually fit the best?
Realistically, I think you like this answer. I think that he'd make a very good fit at Liverpool. Yeah. But maybe it's too soon in his career to move there. Personally, I think this summer he would have moved to Leipzig if they didn't sign Hwang already. Obviously, given the Leipzig and Salzburg connection, it's quite easy for him to move there as well. But next season, surely, if Leipzig is struggling in attack, Daka is definitely the perfect option for them. He has very similar characteristics to Timo Werner with regards to his movement and his speed. So Leipzig's definitely a good option. Liverpool's another option. So I expect it to be between those two, especially if Firmino doesn't get the goals this season. I know his main role in the team is to not get goals, but Daka definitely has those characteristics to link up with the rest of his teammates. But I definitely do feel it's between the two of them, Liverpool and Leipzig. But a lot of it depends on how their forwards performed this season.
Yeah, and another player there at Salzburg who's kind of really caught the attention of a lot of people is Dominic Szoboszlai.
Yep.
He's been a hot player this summer. He's actually performed wonderfully last season and even in the Champions League as well. And there's potentially a lot of suitors for him. So DJ's second question is, where do you expect Szoboszlai to end up? Because it's again, we have, I guess we still have 15, 20 days of the transfer window left, and especially in England, I mean, and do you see him moving this summer, or again, do you expect another winter transfer fiasco concerning Szoboszlai?
It's definitely not going to happen this summer, I feel. I feel it's too late for him to go. And Salzburg have been pretty keen on keeping him as well. But with regards to his next move, next summer definitely seems like he and Daka will leave for sure. For Szoboszlai, I feel that Arsenal would be a very good option. They're in need of a creative player. Maybe next summer will be too late for them to move because they might sign a midfielder already this summer. But I feel that Arsenal is definitely a good option for him because he fills, he ticks all the boxes for a player they need. And, if Arsenal get in the Champions League next season, it could be the perfect move for him. It's a club in transition, a club that's developing with a few young players around him. So it'll be the perfect move for him and the club. And he's definitely very talented. So there's no doubt that it would be a very good fit for him.
Yeah. And Dieter's third question again, I mean, we touched upon two players who are pretty much in the young phase of their career. They're actually a long way off their peak. But again, another question from Dieter is regarding the biggest under-20 talents at the Red Bull clubs. So do you have some names in your mind who you think that people should watch out for?
Yeah, sure. I can't speak for the Bragantino and the New York players, but for the European players from both Salzburg and Leipzig, there are a couple of names that have stood out over the last few years. The biggest one is obviously Karim Adeyemi, who plays for Red Bull Salzburg. He's still under 20. I think he's 20 this year. But he's definitely the biggest talent coming out of Salzburg. People feel that he can be the next big thing from the Salzburg carousel of talents. He already played for the first team plenty of times this year. And he got a lot of appearances in the UEFA Youth League where he was very impressive. So I do feel that he's definitely one to watch out for. He's a German footballer as well, played for the youth teams, I believe. But from Salzburg, he's the biggest talent. Another Salzburg player is Noah Okafor. He's also been featuring in the first team a couple of times this season, Swiss youth international, and he also turned 20 this year, and he's almost 21 in the coming months. So those two, Adeyemi and Okafor, will definitely be the biggest players coming out of Salzburg. Maybe in 2 or 3 years, maybe they'll be the next Sadio Mane, the sorts of players who move abroad for a significantly big fee. With Leipzig, it's a few younger players, a few of the academy players. A player called Hugo Novoa. He was signed from Deportivo La Coruña last year, or 2 years ago, or last year, I think, yeah. But yeah, he was signed from Depor last year, and he's been playing in the academy. People and Leipzig, they feel that he can be the next player to break from the academy into the first team. The club themselves haven't had much luck with regards to players playing in the first team because the path from the academy to the first team has been blocked by the amount of talent in the first team. So there are a few players in the academy who they have big hopes for. The other two players are a Dutch pairing, Solomon Bona, who was signed from Ajax, and Noah Ohio, who was signed from Manchester City. Last year Leipzig did this thing where they wanted to revitalize the academy in terms of coaching, in terms of talent they bring in from abroad, because there were too few academy graduates playing in the first team. So they've gone beyond borders and signed some international players in order to boost their academy. And I do feel that in the next 3 or 4 years, there will be a few graduates from the Leipzig academy who play for the first team. So yeah, it's those 3 players for Leipzig: Hugo Novoa, Salomon Bono, and Noah Ohio.
Yeah, and just above the age of 20, you have players like Tyler Adams, Dani Olmo, Christopher Nkunku as well, who are players who definitely people should look out for because they're really, really talented, and Tyler Adams definitely showed that last season.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And
I have big expectations for Tyler Adams. Obviously, the goal against Atletico Madrid was big for his career.
Yeah.
And I do feel that this season he will have more chances in the first team. He was a bit of a rotational midfielder last season. But this year, with Lima's injury issues and Sabitza's Sabitzer not being fit for the first few weeks of the season, I do feel he'll get more chances to play, and hopefully he's definitely a good player, and hopefully he gets more chances to prove it.
Yeah. And coming on to the final patron question here, Karan, from Data itself. So this is regarding your book. So, I mean, Red Bull obviously is a big story to cover, the Red Bull football clubs. Was that the motivation behind writing a book, or if not, what was it?
It was a reason that I mentioned earlier that, the Red Bull clubs, they're not very liked around the world, but they do a lot of good things in the game itself with regards to their promotion of younger talent and their international scouting network. And obviously Ralf Rangnick, who I think I've mentioned this many times, I do really like Ralf Rangnick, and he is basically the mastermind behind this whole thing, and he's one of the figures that I've tried to learn a lot from in terms of coaching. But yeah, those three reasons, their intensive promotion of younger players, the international scouting network, and Ralf Rangnick, those were three massive reasons for writing the book. From a personal perspective, I felt that writing a book was a good step to take. Whenever you work on something, natural progression is necessary. And I started writing when I was 16. I've been writing for about 5 years now, featuring mainly on online publications. So I felt it was a good time to write a book. I definitely had the time for it with COVID and all that going on and lockdown. So I had the time for it, and I had the resources, and I could pull it off. So it's a mix of personal goals and the topic itself being very interesting.
Great to hear that. Yeah.
You've touched on Ralf Rangnick there.
Yep.
Karen, and I don't think we could really have a podcast and speak about Red Bull without speaking about Ralf Rangnick, especially given the influence he's had over the football side of the brand since it's begun. Really, were you surprised at his resignation from the role and his decision to move on?
Not really. When the agreement with Milan broke down, it was almost certain that he would leave.
Yeah.
Even though he agreed to stay on for a while longer. But when the time came, it felt as though he achieved everything he could with Red Bull. When he joined in 2012, the objective was to streamline the team. When he joined, the team was both teams, Salzburg and Leipzig. Well, they had older players, they had expensive players, they had players who were not performing to the highest level. It was basically a group of players in the twilight of their careers, just older ones who were looking to make a final wage in their careers. So his objective when he joined was to streamline the whole system and ensure Leipzig reached the Bundesliga. And he did that in the 8 years he was there. While when he joined, they were playing in the third division, and when he left, they were Champions League semi-finalists or Champions League quarter-finalists, because he left 1 month before they reached the semi-final. So he definitely achieved his objective while he was there, and he must have felt there was nothing more he could do to make them better. He left the resources in place. He left a very good coach in Leipzig, perhaps the best young coach in the world with Julian Nagelsmann. And even in Salzburg, they had a good system with their academy. So when players left Salzburg, there were always players to replace them. A lot of people say that it's very similar to the Ajax model, but obviously Ajax are self-dependent. But yeah, there was nothing more to achieve for him, and he must have felt he needed a new challenge. And in an interview last month, he said that his next job has to be at a club where he's guaranteed to win trophies. And maybe he feels that he needs to add more trophies to his CV, because I think in his CV he just has one DFB Pokal with Schalke. So maybe it was a mix of personal goals and, the feeling that his work was done and a new challenge awaited him.
Yeah. And you mentioned there, maybe that's a good point that you've raised. Obviously, his CV in terms of trophies won is probably relatively bare, apart from that one trophy. But I mean, I'm a massive Ralf Rangnick fan, and I think his influence over German football, certainly since the start of this century, has been. I mean, you could argue that he's been the most influential, given the amount of effect that he's had on Nagelsmann, Thomas Tuchel, even Jurgen Klopp. Do you think that goes under the radar a little bit, given his influence over German football?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I could go on for about 2 hours about this, but he's definitely the most important figure, or maybe one of, if I want to be generous, but he's definitely up there as one of the more important figures in German football for the last 2 decades. His work started all the way back in the 1980s when he was watching Dynamo Kiev and Valery Lobanovsky with their systems of pressing and intensity, and he learned from that and tried to put that into his teams. When he joined Stuttgart as a youth coach, he put that model into action for younger players at a time when nobody else was doing it. He came on TV in 1998 and explained his philosophies. And at the time, German football was still very backward. They were still going on with the sweeper system and all that. And Ralf Rangnick said he didn't directly say it, but he was trying to imply that German football is incredibly backward. And even the national team coaches came out and said, Rangnick, you're wrong, and you're you're acting that you're way too big for your boots and all that. But in time, it was proven that he was right. After the television appearances, Germany, they had a bad tournament in 2000, at Euro 2000. They had a good World Cup in 2002, but that was mainly down to luck. They played teams like Saudi Arabia and the USA on the way to the World Cup final. And, they beat teams they ideally should have beaten. So you could say in a way that 2002, they were arguably the worst World Cup finalists ever because they had such an easy run to the tournament. And when they faced Brazil, they were rightly beaten. And in 2004, once again, they had a bad Euros when they finished last in the group. So in time, it was proven that Rangnick was right. And in the 90s, there were very few teams who were applying his methods. One of them were Mainz, where Jurgen Klopp was playing. And that was perhaps an influence on him as well. Klopp has often said that he learned a little bit from coaches like Rangnick. And they've carried on that influence, these coaches that you see nowadays, Marco Rose, Julian Nagelsmann, Jesse Marsch, they all learned from that era of German football when it was transitioning from the sweeper system to Rangnick's methods of aggressive pressing and back four. So they've all learned from Rangnick in a way, and even the coaches you see now, as I said, Marco Rose, he was coached by Rangnick at one time. Julian Nagelsmann was learning at Hoffenheim, and Nagelsmann was at Hoffenheim when Rangnick was at Hoffenheim, and Rangnick at the time was applying all his methods there. So all these coaches, in a way, learned from Rangnick at different points in their career, and you can see their success now. It's no surprise that German coaches have been involved in each of the last 3 Champions League finals. They are the best in the world for teaching their coaches, and a lot of that comes down to Ralf Rangnick.
Yeah. And Karan, I mean, you mentioned Ralf Rangnick there. I just wanted to bring in another guy, Jesse Marsch, who actually worked under Rangnick at Leipzig as his assistant in the 1920. I mean, when Rangnick was the manager of Leipzig, 18-19, and he actually was coaching the New York Red Bulls in the US, where he actually became, I guess if I'm not wrong, he became their most successful manager ever. And he also set a record there, I guess, for New York Red Bulls best season. So, I mean, after the success there, he actually moved here to Leipzig to be part of Rangnick's team, and he was assistant there. But once Marco Rose, again, another top manager who left Salzburg, he was the manager of Salzburg. So Jesse Marsch took over Salzburg, and I was hearing this podcast which the guys at the other Bundesliga did with Marsch last summer, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. And it was a really good podcast where he actually explained the insights and how it is to work with the Red Bull clubs, and he kind of explained different stuff. But as a manager, as a coach, Jesse Marsch is someone who's actually, again, caught the attention. I mean, almost everyone who kind of manages or gets into a role at the Red Bull clubs manages to impress the people, impress the pundits or anyone else in the footballing world. So Marsch is another top coach who is going to get a big move soon. So what do you make of Marsch or Marsch's career so far?
I do feel he's a very good coach, and he's done a lot in his career already, as you mentioned, with the New York Red Bulls. When he joined the New York Red Bulls, people didn't appreciate it because he had very little coaching experience. And in one of his first appearances to the public, he really angered supporters by saying that he wants New York Red Bulls to play like Red Bull, the energy drink. And people felt that he was a bit of a corporate appointment, that he was just there to boost the brand and all that. But he really proved people wrong in his first season when they had their greatest season ever. And from there, he just built on his career. And he's one of the biggest success stories from Red Bull's influence in football. Red Bull want their teams playing in a particular way, which is the Rangnick way of, as I mentioned, vertical football, just playing with aggression, playing with speed, playing with a lot of high pressing. So he put those methods into play at New York, and he deservedly got his chance to work under Rangnick and learn more about European football in 2018. So while all that was happening, he learned a lot about how to make things. And it's very rare to see American coaches succeeding in Europe, but he was a bit of an outlier. He set the benchmark for American coaches, and it's a big success for the country as well. Obviously, you mentioned the Salzburg job. When he got the Salzburg job, the Salzburg fans weren't very happy. They released a banner before his announcement. They said that they don't want Marsh being at the club. But he proved I was wrong there as well. Right now, I think out of the last 5 or 6 coaches they have, Marsh has been arguably the best one. They've been scoring goals at free will, and they even played in the Champions League, which no other manager achieved before. So, there's definitely massive potential in him, and he's also very young. You mentioned Marco Rose as well, and even Julian Nagelsmann. All 3 of them are young managers, still below 40 years of age. Rose is 43. Marsh is around that age as well, but they're under 45 years of age, and they still got a good 15, 20 years left in management. So yeah, there's definitely massive potential in him, and I think that he's going to have a very good career. Maybe one day he'll move over to England and perhaps play in the Champions League more consistently. So yeah, that's the main point. He has a massive career ahead of him.
Yeah, fair.
And you mentioned Liverpool as well, and obviously you support Liverpool. But when Klopp leaves, I think that one of those 3, Nagelsmann, Rosa, or Marsh, will definitely be considered as his replacement, because that would make most logical sense. When clubs are going in a successful pattern, they want to replace them with managers who have an identical philosophy, and those 3 do share the identical philosophy with Klopp. So logically, when Klopp leaves, one of those 3 will definitely be considered, provided they're still good in their careers.
Yeah, personally as well, I think I would also prefer one of those 3. I mean, Rosa is especially another interesting character there. He's actually played under Jurgen Klopp at Mainz. So there's that as well. So
we have clubs like Chelsea and United who just sacked managers for fun and appointed a different manager who has a completely different philosophy, and the whole process is ruined. But Liverpool, if they continue this run that they're on, they'll definitely do well.
Yeah.
And just one last question on Ralf Rangnick, Karan.
Yep.
What's next for him, in your opinion?
He wants a winning project, as I mentioned earlier. He said that in an interview.
Yeah.
He wants a project where he can win trophies. But at the moment, it doesn't seem like any club wants him. Logically, I think that if he gets the freedom, Manchester United should go for him. And it's a combination of factors that would make it very successful. United in recent years have had this philosophy of wanting to make as much money as they could, but given that the players have performed so poorly, they can't sell their players on for a very high fee. At Red Bull, Ralf Rangnick always had this philosophy of buying low and selling high, so that would suit perfectly for United. But they won't have to sell each time because they're a much bigger club than Leipzig are. Even when it comes down to the academy, Red Bull have been very good with their academy. United have probably the most successful academy team or academy system in England. So there's another factor working out there. And obviously he can be part of a massive revolution at United. But I don't think that he should come in a coaching sense. I do feel that if he works side by side with Solskjaer, they have a very similar line of thought in terms of how they want their teams to play. Rangnick is obviously experienced, but Solskjaer tries to implement that counter-attacking, aggressive style of football. So they do have a very similar line of thought when it comes to their style of play. So if he works side by side, as a technical director or a sporting director or whatever it's called nowadays, if he works in that role, there's definitely a lot of potential in that. I do feel that United is the best option provided he gets the freedom. Every manager who's worked at United, whether it's Moyes or Mourinho or Van Gaal, who's worked under the Glazers and the Woodward, has complained about how they didn't have that sort of independence to do what they wanted, and they were constrained by the financial situations of the clubs. But if they're willing to follow Rangnick's methods, he can definitely make a very good team for a very low cost. And obviously, given his international scouting, when he joined the club, he brings this large network of contacts. If you look at the signings they made at Red Bull, Minamino came in from Japan, Daka came in from Zambia, Mane from Senegal, Keita from Guinea. They all played in France or other countries at the time, but he has a very large network of contacts where he can get talented players at a young age for a very low price. So it's perfect for United, but they don't really make logical decisions anymore. So it seems pretty unlikely. But if you could go there, for sure.
I was actually quite intrigued to hear recently when I was listening to another podcast, a very well-respected German journalist said he was on the verge of joining Everton. So just before Carlo Ancelotti took the job, he'd actually gone as far as agreeing a contract for him to take over Everton. Now he supports Everton, so I was quite intrigued to hear that. Also, it's not the first time that he would have been interviewed for the Everton job, because I know he interviewed for it. It's subject to Roberto Martinez getting the job. So, that would have been really exciting for me if someone, because he is someone that I've researched and I'm a big fan of. So
he's been linked to a lot of jobs in England in the past as well. In 2016, when England sacked Roy Hodgson, they had a choice between Sam Allardyce and Ralf Rangnick, and chose Sam Allardyce, which obviously didn't work out very well. And even if you go back to 2011, when Liverpool sacked Roy Hodgson, Ralf Rangnick was also let go of at Hoffenheim at the same time, and there was a small rumor that Rangnick might take over, which would have been the start of basically the Klopp era, but 6 years earlier. So he has been linked to plenty of jobs in England. Even when he left Schalke in 2011, and he took a year-long break, there was reports of a lot of clubs in England wanting to take him, but a move never materialized, and he moved to Red Bull, which is where he had all the freedom. So there is it's a bit like Bielsa, where people want him in the Premier League, but at this moment it seems pretty unlikely that he'll join in.
Yeah. And Karan, I'm talking about Leipzig again. Last season, I guess we can all agree upon the fact that they kind of overperformed in the Champions League. I mean, Champions League semi-final probably was an overachievement for them from a club perspective, because I don't think the squad was ready to be a Champions League semi-finalist on paper. But again, they finished third in the league last year. I mean, they had a really good season overall last summer, during Nagelsmann's first year again. But what really do you think is the next step for Leipzig? Because again, Bayern Munich, they compete against Bayern Munich in the Bundesliga. Bayern are not showing any signs of going down anytime soon. They're also making really, really good additions whenever they need. And Champions League, again, it's not always easy. So what do you think is realistically the next step for Leipzig?
I think it's going to be, they'll want to finish in the top four again this season. I think it'll be a little more tougher with Timo Werner gone. The thing about Leipzig is it's difficult to tell what exactly the direction is at this moment. They keep developing these excellent players, and each summer or every 2 years, they keep leaving. Naby Keita left in 2018, Werner left this summer, and maybe Upamecano will leave next year. So it's difficult to tell where exactly the direction is. I do feel that they need to win one major trophy very soon, and the best chance of that is the DFB Pokal. Once they win the trophy, and it sort of certifies them as a club that's serious, that wants to challenge Bayern, they will have that little more legitimacy, and players will want to stay, or more talented players will want to join. But I think this season will be a little more difficult with Werner gone. I think they'll finish fourth behind Gladbach. Obviously, Gladbach had the defeat yesterday against Dortmund, but I do feel that Gladbach will perform better than they will this season in time. But beyond that, maybe in the next 3 or 4 years, they will feel that they need to challenge Bayern in order to maintain themselves, or certify themselves as a massive club in Germany. It'll take a while to develop. They're still fairly young in the Bundesliga. They've been playing in the league this is their 5th season. So they definitely do need to keep hold of some of their best players, and obviously keep hold of Julian Nagelsmann. I said a couple of months ago that they were the likeliest challengers to Bayern in 2-3 years' time, and I still feel in time that'll come true, especially with Dortmund also being sort of in that phase where they're selling their best players. So yeah, that's about it. They need to keep their players basically, and win a trophy as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'm quite intrigued to know what Red Bull's approach to Leipzig is. Karen, maybe you could probably touch on this a little bit more for any listeners that listen in to us after the show. I think it's fair to say that Leipzig are the team, the football team with the most potential under the Red Bull umbrella, given the fact that they are already in the top the top third of the Bundesliga, which is one of the most powerful, or one of the best leagues in European football. But when I look at Borussia Dortmund now, and you've just mentioned them there, I get the impression with them that they're almost happy to play second fiddle to Bayern Munich, because there's been opportunities over the last couple of years to sort of win the Bundesliga, I think, for Borussia Dortmund. And I know Rafik mentioned there how good Bayern Munich are now, but before the pandemic hit, I think it's easy to say that there was a title race on, and given last year under Niko Kovac, there's an argument to say that Borussia Dortmund should have won the league as well, given the lead that they had. Now, are Red Bull going to take an approach with Leipzig to say, right, let's be the number one team in Germany, or are they just happy to make the German league a 3-horse title race or a 3-team league as opposed to just a 2?
Yeah, you're right when you said that Dortmund, it was a missed opportunity for them over the last 2 seasons. Even last season, they had, I think, a 7-point lead at one stage, and arguably they should have won the Bundesliga. They sort of collapsed, even though Bayern were revitalized in a way, even when Hansi Flick came in. So It was definitely a missed chance for Dortmund that they should have ended the Bayern monopoly of the league last season. Even Leipzig had that chance, even Gladbach, but they all collapsed bizarrely in the same time. So, Dortmund definitely do want to compete. They want to be champions, and they've said that countless times that they want to break the Bayern monopoly of the league. And I feel that that's the same case with Leipzig as well. The head coach, the Nagelsmann, is always talking about wanting to compete with the best, and so is the sporting director. So, they don't want to. Nobody wants to see this league being monopolized because it's such a great league with great players and coaches. So there's definitely a point where they might feel that maybe they should drop, or not, maybe they should reduce this philosophy of buying players and go for 1 or 2 more experienced names to carry them over the final line. I do feel that point will come maybe 1 or 2 years from now, when they feel that they have a squad that's developed enough, that's experienced enough. Maybe they'll spend a bit more on improving it on those 2 or 3 winners or leaders for their team in order to break the Bayern dominance. But while I say that, they're competing against probably the best run club in world football with Bayern. Bayern are always very ruthless. They don't carry that emotional baggage. When Niko Kovac, who was a former player of theirs, he was performing poorly. He lost a few games and they sacked him. They were happy to do that. Not every club has that emotional attachment with their managers. So in Bayern, they want to keep winning. They want to keep, stamping their authority in whatever competition they play. So it's difficult to see their monopoly breaking. But if Dortmund and Leipzig spend those extra millions to buy those winners, I do feel that there will be more of a challenge for Bayern.
Yeah, fair enough, Karan. So finally, before we end the podcast, Karan, I'd just like to ask you one question. This is for our listeners. So in your opinion, what do you think will the listeners get to read when your book is out, or why do you think they should buy your book?
It's a combination of a lot of stories related to the Red Bull Group. It tells you about their philosophies and why they do what they do, and it obviously tells you about the people who are involved in it. If you're intrigued by the Red Bull Group and their style of working, it's definitely a book worth reading for you. If you know very little about them, then once again, it's this book is designed for you. So there's a lot of interviews in it, a lot of reliable people talking about what they do, and there's a lot of research done behind it to provide you with the best possible information. There's a massive portion in the book where I talk about their recruitment, their academies, their international scouting system, and if you're intrigued in that sort of thing, the book is designed for that. So in short, it's there to provide information on the Red Bull influence in football. And I hope it's a good read. If you get a copy of the book, do let me know how it is.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I certainly will be purchasing it because I'm very intrigued by Red Bull's influence over football at the moment, and what's to come from them. Who knows? I mean, could say that the world is their oyster in terms of what they could achieve in football. You've mentioned your research. I was just wondering, could you elaborate a bit more on that, Karan? Could you tell us in detail a bit more about the research that you had to do for the book?
Yeah, sure. It's different from what I used to do before, because when you research for online pieces, there's this I don't know how to describe it in words, but when you do research for a book, there's more freedom because you have more time. Online writing is more time sensitive, but when you're writing a book, you just need to make sure it's readable 5, 10, 15 years from now. So it was a bit more difficult and a lot more fun as well. But my research started for the book back in November when I watched Leipzig play Mainz, who coincidentally they're playing today in the Bundesliga. It started back then when they won 8-0, and I was really intrigued by how a group that's disliked the world over plays so well and so attractively. It started back then, and I tried to learn more and more about their international network. Firstly, when I was writing the book in February and March, I was making a lot of calls and doing a lot of interviews with people around the world. I spoke to a couple of journalists covering the New York Red Bulls. I spoke to a couple of journalists covering football in Zambia. I spoke to one of the coaches, the youth coaches of Patsandaka and Mwepu, and they provided a lot of information. So that was a really good chat. They told me about how they were as young players, how their ambitions were, and all that. So it was definitely a lot of fun. And you learn a lot of stuff in this process of research. I spoke to a lot of journalists based in Germany, and they told me a lot about Ralf Rangnick and Julian Nagelsmann and people involved in Leipzig. Even Ernst Tanner, who I mentioned was the academy coach at Red Bull Salzburg when they won the UEFA Youth League, he provided me with a lot of fun anecdotes. I don't want to give too much away right now, but there's a lot of anecdotes, and he told me a lot about Marco Rose and Julian Nagelsmann and Jesse Marsch and Imran Imaric, who was the assistant manager at Borussia Mönchengladbach. So yeah, they definitely told me a lot of good things, and it was fun to talk to them. And in a way, I sort of built a good rapport with a few of those journalists and professionals. But yeah, that's it. That's all I can say. I mean, in short, it was a lot of fun. Very exhausting. I was working maybe say 8, 9, 10 hours a day when lockdown started, so I had the time to pull it off as well. But yeah, that's about it. Yeah,
and what's next for yourself? now that the book's ready for release and ready for pre-order, have you got any more projects that you're working on?
At the moment, no. I'm thinking about my next book, but I want to see how the Red Bull book performs, and obviously Iberia Chronicles, which is the other book releasing on behalf of Red Bull Chronicle. I want to see how that does as well. But I want to see how these two books perform, and if I had the time, I will definitely consider doing a second book. I do have a few ideas in mind. One of them being about PSG's ownership from the Qatari state. But that's all talk for the future. We'll see how things go now with regards to my life and the book as well. Hopefully, if the stars align, there's no doubt that I'll do a second book. But yeah, all in good time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that brings an end to the show, doesn't it, Rifwick?
Yeah, definitely. And we're happy to have hosted you, Karan, once again. We are also happy to have had you on our website as well, although it's from the Football Chronicle archives. So thank you once again. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. It was a pleasure speaking to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me so much. I hope I made sense with my answers, and it was good to talk to you.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
It's a pleasure having you on, Karan. And just for any listeners that want to read any more of Karan's work, I first come across some of your work on Breaking the Lines and These Football Times, and I think the articles are fantastic. I really do. Some really, really good information within them, and I don't think I've ever read an article of yours where I haven't learned something after the article. So I think that's the aim of anyone reading an article, isn't it? So
that's good to hear. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Yeah. So that brings us to the end of this podcast. Thank you once again to all our listeners for tuning into this episode. Until the next episode, bye-bye. Take care.